All right, guys, welcome back to the Adam Peter Fitness podcast. Today on the show, I have none other than Kristen Dunsmore. Kristen was actually one of the first female powerlifters I kind of came across, and I was like, "Who is this jacked lady who is moving all this weight?" And I remember that she used to be training with Juggernaut, and that's kind of
Yeah.
how I actually started with my powerlifting too. I had a coach who was interned by Chad, and I got some good progress with that. But now I don't train like that anymore for some pretty obvious reasons that lots of people know about. They're great company and definitely works for a lot of people, but there's other ways to train. But going back to Kristen, she's competed at IPF Worlds, has been won nationals in US APL several times, and is also a coach and also smart AF. I think you're in the process of getting like your PhD, right?
Yeah, that's another story as well, but we can kind of discuss that on the podcast too. I'll probably be transferring schools. So I'll be working under Mike Zordos as my mentor and Zach Robinson from Data Driven Strength, who he graduates this summer, and I believe he's going to stay and do his postdoc at FAU. So it'll be, yeah,
That'd be a lot of fun.
yeah. Oh my God, I'm so excited.
What are you
But that,
planning on doing your PhD thesis on? Do you have like any
um,
ideas?
Yeah, so right now, so my area of interest specifically is fatigue and more like mental fatigue and how it can impact performance. So just like life stress or sleep, nutrition, those kind of things, how it can, yeah, affect your training. Even just I had a client who she did really, really well. Then she went back to school to get her master's degree, and you could just tell like she was just very stressed in her training. We had to modify um, just so she could continue training, but in a way that ideally didn't really hinder her what she was doing in school. So that was kind of interesting. So yeah, I guess my area of interest specifically is what I want to do is Mike T has a algorithm that he kind of created. It's called the stress index. And it basically, if you were to take say you had, we'll take Chad's program, for example, right? He had 3 sets of 8 on a squat. Now, how do you keep um, like the stress the same? Um, without, so for a long time we would do volume load, for example, as like a way to track, I guess indirectly, which would be sets times reps, times the weight on the bar. But if you're doing 1 set of 10 at 200 pounds or 10 sets of 1 at 200 pounds, the volume is going to be the same, but that workout is going to be very, very different, right? And how do you account for that? So he created this algorithm called the stress index. So I'll just refer to it as the stress index. And ideally, what I would love to do would be to somehow validate that. But there's a huge area in before you can validate it. It's like, well, what's being measured? And so he calls it central stress and peripheral stress.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that's actually what's being measured. And that's kind of like where my thesis is coming into play is what is it that's being measured? Like it seems to work. He's got a ton of data on it, but we don't know what it is that's actually being measured. So it's kind of a very interesting area in this field because it hasn't been done before. But that's also makes it difficult on me because it hasn't been done before.
I think it's super important because I was even telling my coach, Eric Bodhorn, like we
Yeah.
do all my primary days early on in the week. And I was like, it's because I get mentally so tired from like coaching and the stress of that. And like if I was to put those primaries later on, we've we've tried programming around that, but like that mental stress and emotional like fatigue, I just don't respond well to that. And
Yeah.
I seem to be more like a mental lifter as far as like I don't think I rely on it like I don't like hype that much, but like I rely a lot on focus and like
Yes.
wanting to train and like having a strong desire to train. Typically, like later on in the week, I'm just really tired and I don't want to do that, even though I'm like, maybe the programming is built in that way. Like I've tried so many times, like my primary bench day on like a Saturday, it just does not work. I should be
Yeah.
on like a Tuesday or early on the week. So, and then as regards to like that central versus peripheral stress, like I don't ever pay attention to that. I mostly look at like, are you the type of person that responds best to like a higher intensity or like more so volume? And what I do with there is I just ask them, do you feel better when we're doing sets of 1 to 3 or sets of like 4 to 6
Yeah.
on like top sets and like kind of putting that there and periodizing things as a result of that. Because I do think that's an important part of like training is I think that one of the things that Mike T did really help out a lot of coaches is realizing like we don't like periodization is cool and it gives us a starting spot, but kind of beyond that beginner stage, it doesn't really. It's you have to find out their own unique periodization for that lifter and where they actually thrive the best.
Yeah. And so his, and I guess this is probably more common in powerlifting now is we do RPE. So the perception of effort, right? And how our 1RMs change on a daily basis, right? And so what one week might have felt like RPE 8, maybe the next week was like a 10, or maybe it's a 6. It's just, it varies depending on, I mean, a lot of outside factors that are very difficult to monitor, like because it's not training, right? It's not a training variable. It's like what's going on outside of training. And it's funny that you mentioned like how you require a lot of focus, because I'm not a hype lifter either, but I get in my zone, right? And I can just use this past weekend as a training as an example, is I pulled my top set and I had like 2 back off sets. So my top set was 210 kilos, and then my back offs were like 185. And when I went to pull the 185, I couldn't get it off the ground. I had just pulled my 210, right? So it's not like I was physically not capable. It was just, I feel like um, it requires so much mental energy for me to work up to top sets, especially on deadlift, that by the time I got to my back offs, I was so drained that yeah, I couldn't even get it off the ground. I'm like, I just pulled like 30 kilos more than this. Why why am I struggling? Um, but I think it does come down to your like perception of effort, and just that level of effort was just more than what I could have done. So I ended up having to drop it to like 170 or 170 just so I could complete my workout. Um, and then I mean, you talk about like with Juggernaut, it was very more like percentage based, where I probably would have tried to continue pulling at the higher percentage, so like the 185, even if it didn't come off the ground. um, I was always of the mindset that I have to, this is what's on my program, so I have to hit it. And then if I didn't, it was a horrible workout, and I'm getting weaker.
Right. And I think one of the things with like mental effort, I think that I realized is that I've had several experiences where I'm warming up and I'm like, that
Hmm.
doesn't feel great. Like I'm kind of like, eh. But I also know like I'm warming up and like I'm not like really focused. I'm kind of just like, whatever, it's warm ups. And I want to like sort of like conserve that energy for top set. But then like
Yeah.
I can literally like, get to like my last warm up and I'm like, I focus more and then it feels easier. And then I'll do like a heavy top set, especially on like a week 4 when it's really heavy. And I'm just like, after that, I'm like, I am so tired and I want to go home now. I am done. Like I did that. I tried doing like, 500 for a set of 5, but like you said, the performance fluctuates. It varies. I had a very stressful weekend, relationship stress and business and just life, and I lost weight because of that. And it's like, oh, my max went down that week. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And but like, and also that the mental drainage. I did like I did like 400 for like 178. And I was like, holy shit, that was really hard. And I just did like
Yeah.
160 for like my last set of 8. And it comes down to that. And I think that's such a big important part. In fact, like as coaches, I think more experienced coaches will always say like, I don't think it's the numbers in the sets that really is the biggest thing for like lifters with like fatigues. I really do think like, I always say this, like nobody cares about how hard you're working. We all work hard. Like, like I love Russ, but like when he has had that one thing like a while back, like I'm a hard worker, everybody works harder than me. I'm like, bro, everybody works harder at this. Like you have really good genetics. It's not about that. You know, because you can basically it's about tailoring it for that lifter and like what they actually like and what they respond well to. Like what are they excited to push? What do they like? And I think really creating a program too is why it's so important. Like lifter feels good. That means that their fatigue is controlled most of the time. Obviously you're on some days it's like, okay, I'm just clocking in and getting out. Like my Friday sessions are like it's volume squats, volume deadlifts, high rep belt squat, high rep leg curls. I'm like, I do not want to do this. I want to go home. I don't like want to come into the gym, but I do it. That's a huge part of it, and the whole feeling good. There's lots of things that go into that, but I think like managing that fatigue, making things predictable, and then paying attention to like when you don't feel good, being okay with that. Like understanding that this is where like science where it comes in a lot. It's like understanding fundamentals and principles. It's like that security blanket I have. But I'm like, okay, the grind minor overload is arranged on a fixed value. It's arranged on a fixed value. My max is lower. I'm tired. I got a lot of acute fatigue from that set. This is still productive work. So just going
Yeah.
home and like screw it. Like what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah. I've like I said, I've had those training sessions in the past where I would try to follow exactly what was on the program because it was very much percentage based training. And if for whatever reason I just couldn't get the weight or do the weight that was programmed for me, I would leave the gym uh upset because I wasn't able to complete my workout. And I think even that can, affect your training when you're feel like you're unable to finish these workouts or, you leave the gym feeling upset over your training. That's difficult too. And it's going to make it difficult to want to continue going to the gym. And so one of the things that I've done with my athletes is, you can always create the perfect program on a piece of paper, right? Like this is the best program ever. That's subjective, but if your athlete can't follow it, it's not the best program, right? And so if I have this program and this person isn't able to complete it because of whatever is going on outside of training, then it's not the best program for them. And you have to modify it. And maybe you do some modifications that you would normally look at and be like, oh, why is this person doing that? That doesn't make sense. But there's a reason behind it. So I always found that interesting.
I think you like, you also like, being in school too, like that can really change like your like recovery and like what you can actually recover from. And I think that's what you're talking about, like fatigue and all like mental fatigue, nutrition, emotional fatigue, etc. Like that all changes like where like your maximum adaptive volume is, like where your MRV is and whatever. And we wanted to basically like stay in that spot, which is why like I think it's really important, really just is understanding in like I guess like, as a coach, arming your lifters with that self-efficacy to like know like what signals their bodies are telling them and like what it actually means. It's like if I'm a beginner and they're like, I'm tired and I want to train, I'm like, you don't know anything. Go
Yeah.
train. But if I have somebody like Kristen Dunsmore and they're like, Adam, I feel really, really beat up. Like this is what I'm feeling. I care about that a lot more because you've been training for a long time. You know your body. Um, and so like just understanding that we're trying to just stay within that range, we can actually productively train. It's not about working hard it's about doing the right amount of work. I think that's when you're really going to start seeing better progress and truly auto-regulating and hang out with like a program that actually molds to you over time. In
Mhm.
fact, I would argue that most of the time, if you see lifters have the best training, I think this is really interesting too, is like they have that lowest stress outside of the gym. They're not mentally taxed. They're not working hard. They're on vacation. Heck, look at everybody like during COVID. Like a lot of people who had access to training, like they had pretty good training during that time, as they weren't like super stressed out with outside variables. So I just find that kind of interesting. That's also weird because like you have some sessions where it's like you feel like crap and you're super mentally drained, like, and you come in and you PR. It's really strange how performance works.
It really is. Yeah. And I've actually done that too. Like come into the gym and I'm tired and just mentally and just, I'm not into it. And then I start warming up and I start feeling really good. And then I hit like a PR or something. And yeah, um it's interesting. It's very interesting. There's even some like research about smartphone use. And everyone, is on social media, probably during their training. And it actually, so this paper in particular showed that what like spending about a half hour on your phone through like various social media platforms actually reduced the amount of volume that these participants were able to do versus a non, I guess, fatiguing task. And so it just kind of goes to show you that these things, so if you're, for an example, you're studying for an exam, um, there's probably going to be some, mental fatigue that may hinder your training. Even the smartphone use, for example, which is probably, I would say, what most people will do. I've been guilty of that, especially in between my sets when I got, 5 to 10 minutes of rest and I just play on my phone. And then before I know it, it's like 15 minutes went by and I'm like, oh shit, I got to warm up again.
Right.
Um, so I've actually started putting my phone on like do not disturb when I'm training. So number one, I'm not like going through my phone like through text or anything, and I'm kind of like cognizant about not getting on social media. And it just makes my training more efficient too, because I'm not spending this significant amount of time in between sets scrolling.
Well, you also coach too, and you know that like the boundary between like coach and athlete is like really like it's hard to have, especially if you're doing it online. I have people sending me messages or texting me, and having that focus in the training session, be like, this is my time to like get out and just focus like right in there. I really am a big fan of Charlie Dixon. And one of the things that he said that really resonated with me was he said like it doesn't matter like what you have going on outside of the gym. It doesn't matter like what how much traffic you have to deal with. Whatever you had going on, like your job in the gym is to try to separate that and focus on the task at hand. And I think that's one of the big things too about like we're getting out with that the smartphone uses is that it's basically diverting your focus.
Yeah.
And especially when you need to be focused. And and training does need to be serious to a certain extent. Especially on the compound lifts that are really important. Like if I'm coming into the gym and I have a important set, like I'll be kind to other people. But like when I start warming up, I'm like, do not talk to me. Like I need to focus on this right now. And besides that, like no, like I can't. It's just me just being just say this is just
Yeah.
boundary. Because I have clients in the gym too that want my help, and I'm like, nope, like gotta be an athlete right now. Like I am not your coach right now. I'm just
Yeah.
some dude that's deadlifting. That's important to do as well. I'm just having those boundaries for yourself and understanding like how you like are you the type of person to get easily distracted and pull into like wormholes and whatever and just understanding how you just need to approach training yourself there. It'd be hard though to like to be like oh just focus on the task at hand and you're like I have so much work to do, I have tests, I have whatever, and it's just like yeah you just have
Um,
to be focused.
that's me like 100% is like I'm in the gym and I'm, texting and then I'm like, I don't know, a client sends me a message and I will like respond or, all these thinking about all these things. I gotta go home because I gotta, an assignment due or something. And that was definitely a struggle for a while. I would say now that I've kind of been able to have some better time management, has made it easier. And then again, putting my phone on do not disturb or even just not bringing my phone with me uh, has been really helpful and helped me to stay focused because my brain, that's how it works. It just,
What do you do
100
instead
different things
then?
at once.
Like what did you do instead then of like being on your phone? Because like it's like my adult pacifier. I don't know what to do without it.
Yeah. Breathe. Like I've been really into like the not I know this sounds so stupid.
I was just
Not
like, I like breathing
meditation,
too.
but like, the
No, I get
breathing
it.
exercises where yeah, because sometimes I get like so overwhelmed that yeah, like the breathing exercise. You ever like the Calm app and it's like, in for
Hmm.
3 seconds, hold for two, that kind of breathing. Just to get me to relax and just calm down for a little bit because yeah, otherwise it's like my brain is just going everywhere all at once.
Right.
So
Well, cool. I think
yeah.
we had a good conversation about that. I guess I wanted to talk about one thing was you've had some good posts about like sticking points and different movements, like how they can also change like sometimes between gender. And I guess my
Hmm.
biggest question with that is, I have a lot of people will focus on, okay, this is like the weak point. I had to focus on training that weak point specifically, pin press or mid range or whatever on a bench press. I guess my biggest question there is, number one, my perspective on it is that sticking points are always going to be sticky, and you need to just get generally stronger. But I also know there is some very much benefit to like partial training, especially for like a strength context, especially because like a lot of times as powerlifters we're only like a lot of the times we get like that best press is like end range, or sorry, it's not training end range. It's a lengthened position, and we don't like really get that terminal extension. And sometimes overloading that endpoint can be helpful in some cases, but I guess like, are there ways to sort of program specifically for sticking points, or is that kind of like a myth?
Say it's probably overrated. I don't think it's a myth completely, but I think maybe people like, they think that they have let's just say they have problems locking out their deadlift, for example, and like the go-to is like, oh, well, I'm just going to overload with rack pulls. But sometimes it's like, even though that sticking point is above the knee, it might be where the weak link essentially would be like by your shins or something. So I wouldn't say that it's a myth, but I would definitely say it's probably overrated. That if you're a specific weak point is, yes, you would just train the lift. But I'm more of the mindset of like, I would do more like pause squats or pause deadlifts. So like a couple inches off of the ground, as opposed to doing like a rack pull. Or for bench press, and I think this was the post that you were referring to, is that in general, women tend to be more tricep dominant as the in the bench, whereas men tend to be more pec dominant. But then as load gets heavier, it's like the pec activation in women it increases. And so what's interesting, and again, this is like not all, right? There's always outliers, but in general, it seems that women tend to their sticking point, quote unquote, is more off of the chest, whereas men in general tend to their sticking point is closer to lockout.
Yep.
And that's not, not everybody, of course. I'm sure there's women who struggle at lockout, men who struggle off the chest. But if that's the case, usually, if I would have men doing more like pec work or more I'm trying to think, but women doing more pec work and men doing more triceps. I think I have that right.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
um Confusing myself there.
Because I know that
So
like
yeah.
I always miss that like the end range. Like I literally at my blast meet, I'm like 358. It was like rock ship off the chest. Got that last little bit, and I'm
And you
like,
couldn't.
well, I got it, but like it was like RPE 10,000. It was like a 10-second grind. I'm not even joking. I was like, I'm on
Yeah.
Pana right now. And I was like, what the hell? This is so
Yeah.
dumb.
And the lockout position is mostly triceps. So in that case, then I would probably emphasize more, like closed grip bench or something as a variation. Where for women, if it's off the chest, I actually really like incline bench press, or doing like a deficit push up. So kind of beyond the range of motion, are kind of my go-to.
It sounds
But
to me like
again,
your perspective and like your approach is like identifying a little bit like what's the muscular weakness here, a lot of cases,
yeah.
and then trying to strengthen that with like a variation.
Yeah. I would say that the focus would still be the main movement. But then, so if I have a secondary day or a tertiary day on bench, maybe that tertiary bench day will be one like a closed grip bench if the problem area is closer to lockout. Whereas if it tends to be off of the chest, then maybe we're doing something like more incline, or like the deficit push up. So that's how it would kind of play into it, but the emphasis would still be just bench more.
Right. So like in general, like just still like, focus on just training that movement pattern, but throw in some accessories after that to then, okay, this is where I'm struggling with. This is what I
Yeah.
should do. I think one thing is like it's interesting is that like for myself, like I was talking with my coach about this. So I'm like squat's been really going up a lot, and like that's really been my lift that has made a lot of improvement. And I was like, is it just because like like my squat is really underdeveloped compared to my deadlift, and the only way I'm going to see like, exponential deadlift progress once my squat gets up to a certain point. I think this is an interesting topic too, but like he's like, yeah, probably because like you're if you're deadlifting 722 pounds and your squat's like 551, like that's a pretty big difference. Probably you get a certain percentage of that. Or then like the deadlift to really go up a lot is like my biggest weakness on like a deadlift is like I will go back onto my hips and my back because they're stronger than my quads, like as a higher
In the heavy squat.
intensities. No, like on a deadlift, like on the deadlift, my compensation pattern always is like I'm going to round my back and not
Okay.
stay in my legs. Like even though I sumo, I'll go a little bit more like of like a an RDL or like an SLDL. It's like that's where I'm stronger. And his perspective is like if your squat gets better, as your leg strength gets higher, your actual quads, you'll stay in that, and like that'll actually help you be stronger. Um,
Mhm.
have you seen that be like the case with like squats transferring that well over to deadlift, or like do you
Yeah.
think it depends?
I mean, it probably depends, but yeah, I would say like especially in the sumo, just because it tends to be more of like a quad exercise compared to conventional, that like it could indirectly help your squat performance. Um, Even just I find specifically like conventional deadlift has good carryover to sumo. I don't know how much sumo has to conventional. But whenever I've programmed conventional for someone who's traditionally a sumo puller, their deadlift seems to go up pretty significantly. I have not seen that on squats, but I have seen where like if deadlift is going up, or squats kind of seem to it seems to help squats performance.
Mm. I mean, that makes sense because like if they're both training very similar musculature. I always find it really hard to like really see like consistent progress on, like both. I like the same time. It's always like deadlifts going up a lot for one person, and their squats kind of like and it's trickling along, or it's the opposite. And
Mhm.
like I think that's just the nature of progress sometimes. And like what's like more or less like fatiguing for you at the time is like I always only know that for myself, like my deadlift always gets really masked by like my squat. And
Mhm.
that's like why like my tapering strategy is like I don't deadlift for like a week and I just lower down like my squat volume, my leg accessory. My deadlift always is like a good like 3 to 5% stronger on the
Mhm.
platform. But I don't think that's actually peaking. I think that's just like fatigue going away, like the interference. Because like I don't really get that much of a peak on my squat or bench anyways, like 2%, maybe like
Yeah.
at the very most. Um, because that's an interesting, I think it has to do with that interplay, like how much you're feeling like axially, especially like so if my back feels really tired from my squats or vice versa, like it really just I can't lift heavy. And it makes sense because like
Yeah.
the spine is like if the spine goes, everything else goes. Your body's like,
Yeah.
nope, we're not
Well,
doing this.
well, I said like the other day, it was like I pulled my top set, and then for my back offs, I couldn't even get the weight off of the ground, you know? So it's definitely interesting. And I also think that like you say that the lifts, sometimes squats tend to go really well, or other times it's deadlift, but it's never like all three seem to be doing well all at once. And I would say that I think like at least for me for a long time, I was a squatter, right? Like that was my lift. I was great at squatting and I enjoyed it. And that was a lift that I would always push myself in. And then come deadlift, I was kind of tired, so I would half-ass it. But now because of that, the glute injury that I've had, it's like my squats have kind of suffered. But I also think that I've been so hesitant to really push myself for progress. But deadlifts, I don't have pain. I'm confident when I go in the gym. So my deadlift has been progressing really well. And my squats, which historically was always my lift, has been suffering. But I also think it's partly because I'm hesitant to really push myself, or I'm limited in my ability to really push myself on the squat.
I'm curious about that. Then have you, usually is like as far as like energy management goes, like for me, it's always been like my shoulder and pec. on
Hmm.
benching, like I've been able to pretty successfully like identify like trigger points and like when it happens. So like I kind of know like,
Hmm.
okay, I'm going to be fine here. I'm going to expect some more pain like here, but that doesn't mean like anything is wrong. Have you like been able to like identify that like with yourself, with like, like also like with like your athletes? Because I think that's a really important part.
Yeah. Yeah. So I still have symptoms. So I cannot claim to be pain free. When I'm squatting, I still have not pain, but there's definitely some sort of I can feel it. And I've learned to manage it. So there's like this threshold, right? And as long as that I don't cross that threshold, I know when I can push it, or okay, I need to stop here because if I go do anything more, it's gonna start getting worse and I'm gonna have the flare up again. So I've one of the things that we've been doing is it seems to be like the back offset. So for volume, once I do hit my like a top set, anything after that is going to be extremely painful. So what we've been doing is doing my uh like my volume first, and then I
Mm,
hit my top set on bench, or sorry, not bench, on squat. And again, if this is something that you didn't know my training history, you're like, why is she doing all this volume beforehand? And then she's working up to her top single, right? But there's the reasoning behind that is because once I hit that single, anything after that is kind of like uh it'll
yes,
flare up.
I've seen it with one of my clients too. I That's why I gave him like ascending sets because like and it's just
Yeah,
like a set of four, and like this is like the first block he's been able to do, like on both squat and deadlift, not have his adductor just be in severe pain. And I think it's really
yeah,
like because of that. Also, I think like mentally he's like not like doesn't have like come down. He's like still focused, and I think there's something to So I had my master's degree in athletic training. There's something to like that desensitization of the actual tissue
yeah,
as you do warm up, and that's like why like people like warming up does matter, like in the sense of like blood flow in general things, but like it's not gonna like be the reason why you got hurt or whatever. Like a lot of it comes down to like load management, acute versus chronic workload rate ratio, how long you've been pushing things for, like where you feel best versus worst at, and
mhm,
it's like keeping an eye on those symptoms. I think that like I always like I'm like tell like my clients like I know you feel good right now, but like I have this range at the end of your block because I know that I know that you want to go for more. I know that you're hurt and you're excited, like making progress, but I don't care about how fast progress you make right now. It means that you make hurt. If you get hurt, I care that you're able to make a 5 pound PR every single block for the rest of the year,
yeah,
because that helps creating momentum. It's just exciting. I mean, you don't feel as worse. It's like even like if you're, like, I kind of realized this. I was like, even if I'm making progress, I feel like shit, and some a lot of times. And even if I am like not making progress, I don't feel very good. But like
right,
I feel worse when I'm making better progress, especially like
yeah,
as I've
yeah,
gotten stronger. But it's kind of just like, oh, if I keep those small wins and I manage my fatigue, like I'm more excited for training. It's more like predictable. Like one of my friends, Jeremy, he literally like has to be. I don't know what the hell has been going on with him, but like he like deadlifts like 826. And like this is like he's just being able to make just really consistent progress. Like I asked him like what he's done with like Rondell Hunt. He's like, we just do like 5 to 10 pound BRs every single block. We just don't go above that, even if I feel like I have more. And that's like been like kind of sort of like what's been key for also like keeping him healthy. So you'll think you'll see those people that get in those spurts of injuries. They're doing a lot of volume, a lot of frequency, or their intensity progression is just really high or too chronically high. And it's about like understanding like where do you make best progress at. Because unfortunately, most people don't respond like John Hack. And my theory for why John Hack is so damn strong is he can do an RP 9.5 every single week or 10 and get stronger.
he's insane. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's an anomaly. Yeah, and I think because you kind of mentioned like the desensitization, and I always tell clients, and I guess this probably comes into similar what like Rondell Hunt does with his athletes, um, is you have to think of the pain threshold almost like strength, right? So you want to increase that threshold over time. Um, and that's the same thing with strength, right? It's like your goal is to get stronger over time. And essentially the goal with like that pain and desensitization is you basically want that pain threshold to be higher than your 1 RM, you know, and
Yep.
then you're essentially like cured or whatever. Um, and so I've learned that if I take time away, say, like when I first got hurt, right? Like, and you do everything that you're not supposed to do, because I didn't know, is I took 5 weeks away from squatting and I had no symptoms, but stupid me decided that, okay, I feel good. Now let's go work up to a rep max and see where I'm at, because that's smart. I haven't trained in 5 weeks. Now let me just, yeah, rep max a squat, or max, rep max. Yeah, yeah. So, here I am 5 years later, still dealing with it. But at least now I've kind of learned when to push it and when to, like, all right, Kristen, you keep doing this and you're gonna regret it. So I've kind of learned over time where like that threshold is and when to push it and when to take a step back.
I think pain is also like a normal part of the sport. Like you're going to have some injury, whether, hopefully it's not like, catastrophic one or something that lingers like in your case, but it's a part of the sport. And I think understanding how to respond to pain, and also being able to understand, am I hurt or am I just like in a little bit of like discomfort because I went heavy. So I'll
Yeah.
have a lot of clients who are like, oh, my back's stiff. I'm like, you did like a PR like yesterday. That makes
Yeah.
sense. So like your adductors are sore. Okay. Like
Yeah.
that's
I
the
think
sport, dude.
it's part of being human too. I mean, my mother has low back pain, but she's not a power lifter. It's probably maybe from a lack of exercise. So you're probably at some point going to have pain, right? Would you rather it be because you work out or because you don't work out and you got out of bed and like, rolled the wrong way or something? Um, I feel like it's going to happen essentially regardless, So sometimes it's like, well, is it from lifting or is it just because it's just what happens like as a human? We have aches and pains. That's just normal.
100%. One of the things like there's one of the things you're coming tossed around that like, oh, like if you just are strong, like you're not going to be in pain. I'm like, that's not true. Like
Yeah.
it's not true at all. It's more complicated than that. And in fact, a lot of pain is like there's nothing structurally wrong. Like arguably
Yeah.
for you, it's been 5 years removed from that. Like there might not be
Hmm.
something structurally wrong, but your brain still associates that with like that past experience. When you get under the squat bar, you're like you remember it and you're really hyper aware of it. Like I am like that on like my on like benching. I'm like, oh shit, like I feel a little bit of something. And I'm like, oh God. And it's just like that's part of it. Like I like your what you said about like it's normal. And you could either be, in pain while you're strong and doing something cool or sitting on the couch. And I think also just like everybody has different injury resiliency like levels. Some
Yeah.
people just don't get hurt easily. I've always been one of those people. Like I remember running around like keep doing all sorts of hood rat shit, like jumping off of trees and whatever. I just didn't get hurt. Right? Like I just I played football. I didn't get hurt. And like other people just they seem to like be significantly more prone to that. I think with those people especially, you have to be really really creative with like your programming, like with you doing your back down work like before. And I think the Sean Noriega and I talked about this, but he said something I really liked with if you it was asked the question like or some lifters just are not you'll like overcome like plateaus. Like, how do you troubleshoot plateaus? He's like, I feel like that's a perception of your inability as a coach to problem solve if you can't do that. And usually you have to go to the thing you don't think is going to work first and then go there and problem solve. And he's like, sometimes the athletes are going to be patient enough and stick with you. Other times it's going to go to a different perspective. That's also like I think that's a really important thing to consider too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think as coaches, it's funny. I forget who I had this conversation with, but basically, like as coaches, we know nothing, right? Like nobody knows, like no one. The difference between like an experienced coach and an inexperienced coach is we just happen to, because we don't know what's going to work, right? It's kind of like, oh, well, we'll try this and hopefully you see progress, or like we see progress. We just come to that solution quicker than someone who's maybe inexperienced, and that's the difference between an experienced coach and an inexperienced coach, is we just kind of problem solve faster. But we don't know what the issue is. We don't know what's going to work. We just, okay, well, based off of past experience, based off of what I know, this is what seems to work. But, again, it's just an educated guess
Right. And I
at the
think
end
one
of
of
the
the things
day.
too is like plateaus are normal, like, and I
Yeah.
think lots of times as you get more experience, like I always tell people like for example, I was really, really overly fatigued going into trying to go into this last meet. I pulled out of it because I was just like, I was hurt. I was tired. I didn't feel like I made enough progress to like just justify it. Which by the way, I think that should be something that's more normal than like, I'm just going to compete, whatever. I'm like, if you're hurt, if you're fatigued, you're not going to make progress. Like, why put yourself through that? But like I had an estimated max of like 540 on my squat. And then I changed a few things with like my programming and managed my fatigue under control. In 2 blocks, I've gone from 540 to 584.
Oh,
And the
wow.
reality is that that's how progress can happen, especially if it's a fatigue issue or you identify the issue. But the only way that you're actually going to see that progress is you keep training, you keep showing up to the gym, you keep trying to problem solve, you stay patient, and you do things that you maybe don't think are going to work. Like my bench is finally
Yeah.
making progress again, and I'm doing 2 times a week. And here all the time, 3 times a week, baby. Got to do it. Anything more than anything less than
Yeah.
that, I'm like, guys, I have a client right now doing 1 time a week bench with 1 time a week of incline to dumbbell. And that's how he's getting stronger because he has chronic elbow pain. And I'm like,
Hmm.
and that's like, I guess, like going out over there. Progress is not linear. Get used to it. I was like, too. Like, you're going to have some periods where, like, randomly, it's like, boom, you have 10
Yeah.
kilos on your squat, and then nothing happens. But
Hmm.
the only way you're going to be around for that is if you keep trying. And that's why this is like a 10-year sport minimum.
What did you do differently when you said that your squat was at 540 and then to 585? What was it that you changed in your program?
We put back in safety bar on my secondary days. I do high bar squats. I doesn't feel like I low bar just messes with my shoulders too much. I have a hard time maintaining
Hmm.
center of mass. And my generally my weak link tends to be like maintaining my upper back extension. If I lose that,
Yeah.
I'm done. So we put that back in. I also look back over my entire 2.5 years of training with Eric, with everything. I'm like, I'm figuring this shit out. I'm not having this happen again. Like what works on squat and deadlift. We'll figure out bench later. I don't know what the fuck works there. And I was like, okay, I do sets of 1 to 5. Usually it's actually doing more volume. I'm very intensity sensitive. Keeping things lighter there. And then more specifically having bigger weekly weight jumps. So like I'm basically planning backwards from like a 5 to 10 pound PR, and I do about 22 pound jumps per week, so about 4%. And then I also put back in belt squats on my secondary squat days instead of leg extensions. And I felt like I didn't have any pop in my quads. Like I was just like detrained and wasn't, I didn't have enough like actual fatigue. My squat performs best when I have some fatigue. So I changed that. And that's really kind of what made it really good. Really, I actually had the chance to actually lower down my fatigue. I would never go light enough. I would always assume my max was like higher than actually was. And it's putting in a variation that helped out there. And that really has made significant changes. And then like with my deadlift, we went back to a higher up conventional my secondary days, and I do higher up sumos too. I'm again a higher volume. I'm intensity sensitive, really on everything. And then with bench press, we went back down at 2 times a week, and that's been what's worked well for me. And
Yeah.
I'm like just barely like recovering from that. Like
Really?
I'm I'm a I am so sensitive to volumes. I push really hard. Like I did 7 sets of pressing. I did 1 set of 5 and then 3 by 8, and then 3 sets of inclined dumbbell pressing. And then I did like literally 4 sets of triceps after that and 2 sets of lateral raises. And I was cramping so bad that night I could barely sleep because like
Oh, wow.
I can damage myself like that well. I think it makes sense because like if you look at me, I'm like 90% appendage. So I have a really like long range of motion. Like even though like I'm a good deadlifter, like I have bars like traveling a very long distance. So yeah,
Yeah.
but like again, like that's also the value of tracking your training and staying with the coach for a long time is that I literally put together an entire presentation in our check-in. And Eric, I'm like, this is what works well, this is what doesn't. This is what we're going to try to doing here. I want to do this. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
He's like, cool. So
Okay. Oh, that's funny. How long have you worked with Eric?
2.5 years. So right
Okay.
after Jagger got into the he got into the Air Force. And so it was like he's
Oh,
like,
nice.
I'm not gonna be powerlifting coaching anymore. And then I was like, I like Bryce Lewis, TSA. And then I got
Hmm.
assigned to Eric.
Yeah.
which I was really happy about because I like Chrissy and Chance. I knew that he
Hmm.
coached them.
Yeah.
And he's been great for me. He went from like a 435 squat to a 551 squat, 319 bench to 358, and then 650 to 722 on deadlift, and then a 440 to a 500 dots. So,
Oh wow.
um,
Yeah.
but
Congrats.
I thank you. But that's like I don't know. I feel like once you find your coach, like you have your coach for until they decide to stop training you.
Yeah. Or you decide to stop lifting. Um, yeah, I'm actually working at the moment with Alfred from
Okay,
Reformance.
reformance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So initially I was just going to do my own training leading into the next meet. But I've always been of the mindset that like even a coach should have a coach, because there are times where it's like if I were to coach myself, I'd probably dig myself into the ground, right? So having like a second set of eyes has been really helpful. And he's actually the one that recommended I do like the volume first and then doing my top set. I never thought of that before.
Mm.
That just didn't occur to me. I was more along the lines of, all right, well, I'll just do my top set, and I guess I'm just gonna have to suck it up after and just be more conservative with my back offs. Um, but yeah, so like he came up with that, and it's been working really, really well. So I'm definitely excited to see what these next 2 months, how they go leading into the Raleigh meet.
I'm curious. You're the type of person where you know what to do, but you're so stubborn. You like need someone to like tell you and like do it, or you get like anxious around doing something new. That's how I
Yeah,
am. That's why
yeah,
I have like three coaches.
yeah. So I come from a background with Juggernaut, right? Which historically their training is just fuck ton of volume, right? You're doing like 6 sets of 8 on a comp squat. And I think it probably worked for a while, obviously, but it also, you talk about like managing fatigue and stuff. And over time, I think it was just that like repetition. I really think that's kind of what aggravated my glute. Especially because by the end of those sets, it's like, I don't care how that rep looked. I'm just trying to finish this set is because it sucks. Like 6 sets of 8 are
Right.
just not fun. So when I'm on set 5, I'm like, I just want this to be done with. I don't care how it looks. Feels like shit. I just, like, let me just finish this set. And I think a lot of times the quality of my sets would go down. And after with Juggernaut, I started working with Zach Robinson from Data Driven Strength. And he actually, I had really good progress with him. But then he had to focus on his PhD and thesis and stuff. So he stopped coaching for a little while. But it took a while because the volume was so much less than what I was used to. Um, that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna like get weaker, right? Like it's just these workouts are just too easy. I don't feel like I have to crawl out of the gym. I'm not
Yeah, I know what you mean.
yeah, like if I feel like, I feel fresh, I'm not dying when I leave the gym, so it must not be working. But it's like I knew that it would be helpful, and I knew that like, volume, the amount of volume that I was doing before is probably unnecessary, but it's still, because it's a different style of training that you're used to, that it kind of just takes a while. Um, and I hate to say trust the process, but you kind of do at that point, and say, all right, I trust you, even though I feel like I'm only doing 2 back offsets when I've done 5 in the past, but it worked well. And so I think, yeah, when I decided to go back and do this meet, like I said initially, I was gonna just coach myself. But I think it's helpful just to have a second pair of eyes. And then me and Alfred kind of just like went over a program together. And he was like, what do you think of this? How about this? And we kind of collabed on it a little bit. But yeah, he's the one that suggested doing the volume first before squats. And that's probably been a game changer for me.
I think also for you, like him asking you questions like, "Hey, Kristen, like this is like what I'm thinking. Like, what do you think?" That
Yeah.
also like it's your buy-in and like it helps you trust a little bit better. Like, I will always ask my clients, like, this is what I'm thinking. Like, what do you think? Does that sound like fun? Or like, or for
Yeah.
like my athletes, I know that are a little bit more advanced. I'm like, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think of this? Also like knowing like when to like lay down the law and say, I think this is like what's generally best for you. I know that you don't like this, but like it's important for you to like do it. It's like one part of your program that you don't like. If it makes you better, it's like, that's the difference between like training for enjoyment versus training because you have goals. It's like, athletes do what they must, not what they want.
Yeah. I hate pull-ups, despise them. They are so much like they are not fun. But they're in my program. And I do think that they're, I mean, like indirectly it's been helping with my other lifts, but they're just it's like that one exercise where it's like, oh, I hate this. But I also know that there's probably a benefit to it.
I think the
So I
main
just
thing for
keep
me
trying
with
to
like
remind
pull-ups
myself.
that I like them is that like it's kind of easy to like BS yourself like a pull down. Oh, that was hard. Like, well, I'm good. Like on a pull up, it's like you're gonna go to like RP9 like kind of like by default. Like
Yeah.
that's the main benefit I think of them. Because I think on accessories in general, it's really easy for powerlifters just like mail it in, especially because on the comp list there's such an emphasis on some maximal work because that's what works best from like what science we have on the literature. But hypertrophy in general, it's like the closer you can push to failure, all else being equal, you're going to see more progress. I think a lot of times like lifters that have those really high volume programs too, like they don't really know how to push themselves and look like that's fine. Everybody has different like psychologies around training. Not everybody's a
Yeah.
psycho that wants to go RP9 like every single set. But I think that's the main reason like why you'll see volume differences and other than obviously there's sex differences and strength differences. But I even think the sex differences, it's like obviously there's estrogen for women, but I think a lot of it just has to do down with like strength levels. So if you look at like these stronger women, like in Anna Lawrence, like her volume is not that high. It's closer to like what a dude does.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know too much about her training. I know that they do like singles and then back off sets. Um, but yeah, she's another person who yeah, I don't know what too much about her training, but it doesn't seem like a ton of volume to me.
It's not.
But she's also doing, deadlifting 550 for singles,
Oh, also one thing that actually makes sense to me about like why your performance probably had to go down, Kristen, is like you've gotten so much stronger. And Lyle McDonald, I have discussed this, but like as typically how training volume goes, like your beginner, it slowly increases. You get to be like an
Mhm.
intermediate, and you get stronger, and it starts to go down a little bit because you're doing so much more work per set. And that's actually one thing else too that Eric and I changed. We did one less down set on my squats, and that's helped
Mhm.
me recover a lot.
Yeah. Which is interesting because I think a lot of times people, it's like, oh, you plateaued. We should add more. Let's add more volume. Let's add a set. Let's add a day. And in this case, you guys actually took a set away and found progress. So here you're doing less than you were before and getting stronger.
I'm happy AF about. I don't like squatting. I'm like, hell yeah,
Yeah,
I can make
right.
progress with 6 sets of squat per week, and I just crush accessories after.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And it's probably less mentally fatiguing, right? Because
yes,
it's like even just knowing that I got or would have like 5 back offsets or something, I'm just like, oh, this is gonna suck, right?
you're walking into the gym, and you're like, maybe I should try this hard on my
Ugh.
top set because I have to do 5 sets and
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, and also like Eric Helms was saying this on the Iron Culture podcast that he thinks the big also one thing is like some people like fatigue a lot during their sets or like they get very
Hmm.
mentally drained during their sets and it's going back to mental fatigue.
Hmm.
Other people they like don't, and I think that's
Yeah.
very well correlated with like the actual volume tolerances of somebody. Because like I know there's some people in my gym that do a lot of work. Yeah, I feel fine. I'm happy here. Whatever. I'm doing 5 sets
Yeah.
at the bench. Whatever. I'm good. And other people is just like they get done with like 2 or 3 sets and they're like, okay, I'm tired. I want to go read a
I
book.
still have, yeah, and I still have 3 sets I have to do.
Right.
So I think it's definitely interesting how you guys actually reduced volume and found progress. And
Kind
that
of
just
just
goes
goes
to
to
show you,
show
yeah,
it's about understanding like what your athlete's feeling and then
yeah,
interpreting those properly and then making small changes over time.
yeah. And there's been times where I've like, I've had someone who was benching 4 days a week and we dropped it down to 3, just and started seeing progress from there. Um, and I think it was just, yeah, for whatever reason, it's like maybe that fatigue that they weren't necessarily recovering from. So by like that fourth day, it was kind of, they're not really getting much benefit out of their fourth bench day because, they're just too fatigued.
Yeah,
So it's
like they're like, but
interesting.
like I also think like with like high frequency, the main issue is like connective tissue and integrity. It's very rarely
Yeah.
like a muscular thing because I think especially when you get more trained, like you recover really fast. Like from a muscular
Hmm.
perspective, it's mostly that joint and connective tissue and nervous system fatigue that needs more time.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually really, that's why I like programming tempos. Just because it helps with tissue strength and it also kind of limits how much load you can do, but you still have some sort of like stimulus there. So that's like another go-to exercise of mine is adding in some tempos.
Yeah, I know that could also be a good go-to. But Kristen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's awesome
Yeah.
to talk about powerlifting with you. And again, good luck with your meet in Raleigh. It's going to be
Yeah.
exciting
Thank you.
to watch. Hope you keep safe too and injury free. So,
Yeah.
anyways, if
That's the
people want to
plan.
follow along, hire you for coaching, where should they head?
So my Instagram handle is KRIIS_D. I've had that since like I've started Instagram, so don't ask me why. I just feel like can't change it at this point. As far as coaching, you can go to empowerlifttraining.com and apply for coaching there.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure I include those details in the show notes. And thank you guys for
Yeah.
listening to this episode. And I'll talk to you guys in the next one.